In this broadcast, I wanted to discuss my own spiritual journey. If you notice on my website, the tagline is, "Let the journey begin." And we're all on a spiritual journey. It starts at birth, actually. And there are times along the way where we can point to in retrospect and say, yeah, that was a pretty important time period in my life where I made some changes. For me, the biggest milestone occurred in 1998, and I know that emphatically because that was the year that my oldest son was born. I was living and working in and around the Washington, D.C. area for a very well-known national politician, and sort of saw a lot about how things were really done. Once you have a child, your entire worldview changes. Literally overnight, you're no longer concerned just about yourself and your wife, but you now have a completely innocent child in your midst that you must now form. So this allowed me to take stock in what was happening in my own life. And there were certainly questions that were out there. I had been in the political arena for 15 years at least at that point. And I first got into it, as a lot of people do, because I think they can make a difference. The political world is where movements happen and people come to Washington and they can try to make changes. And so after 15 years, you suddenly realize that that's not really true. And so it was natural for me, particularly with the birth of a child, to be looking elsewhere besides what I was doing for a living. I had grown up in a household that wasn't overly religious. My father had been raised Irish Catholic. My mother was a Presbyterian. And for them, religion had held a lot of negativity. My father's father was Episcopalian. His mother was Catholic, and so that was not a pleasant thing to be in the 1920s, having a mixed marriage. And my mother's family, certain elements of it had been from a pretty religious sect of Puritans. So when I came along, they had been burnt out, basically. And this was the 1960s and 70s, and people pretty much did whatever they wanted. So for me, after the birth of my son, I started looking around, specifically at religion. And there was a Catholic parish around the corner that I just started going to one Sunday, and the message really resonated with me. It was very clear. It had been teachings that had been around for thousands of years. As a country and as a world, we had seemed to have lost our moral compass, and this newfound faith, to me anyway, it was new, provided a lot of answers. And I threw myself into it. I started going to regular Mass, even though I wasn't full-fledged Catholic. They have a 9-month course if you want to become a Catholic, which I enrolled in the fall of 1999. And in 2000, at the Easter Vigil Mass, I was accepted as a full member of the Roman Catholic faith. I really enjoyed the aspects of learning I had done through my class, and spoke with a priest friend of mine, and he suggested that I continue my studies. So at that point, I went on to a local program here in Northern Virginia where you can get a master's in theology, which was associated with Christendom College, which is a 4-year school down in Front Royal, Virginia. So over a course of 6 years, I completed a master's program, did a lot of studying, had a daily routine where I studied scripture. I went to daily Mass and made a lot of friends in this space, and it became the focal point of my moral compass anyway, in my fellowship, and I got a lot out of it. We had another son in 2002. We raised both of the children in the faith. They attended the local Catholic school where I was a parishioner, and it was a good model, I thought, for how to raise a family in these times in particular. And as they got older and I started looking into other areas, around 2015, I felt a need to look outside of what the Catholic Church had offered. Clearly, there were issues inside the Vatican, if you will. There were things that certainly didn't please me, or most Catholics for that matter, in terms of the scandals that were going on. But it seemed more than that as well. I felt that there were issues such as original sin and other things that I started questioning. So I started looking around a little bit in 2015 and had heard a tape. I guess they're not called tapes anymore. A podcast on somebody who had mentioned the Bhagavad Gita. So I got a copy of that, and it was more of kind of a comparative type of thing as how I approached it, a little bit with a critical mind about how it would relate to what the Catholic Church taught. You know, one being the Gita being really the primary foundation for the Eastern religions, or at least a number of them, and then obviously the Roman Catholic or the Catholic faith in general being the basis for a lot of what the Christian faith had taught over the years. And what struck me wasn't really the differences that came through in those two foundational documents, but was really the similarities. I mean, there's a lot of things in common that they had. They talked about universal love and the need for suffering and the need to lay your lives down for one another. A lot of things you see in Jesus talk about in the Beatitudes. So that was reassuring to me, and so I continued my journey. I looked into a number of esoteric teachings. I learned how to do tarot card readings. I had a natal reading done for me by an expert in this area, and a lot of things sort of that I had been searching had come through in that reading. I also studied alchemy for about a year, which I found fascinating. Our journey really is a spiritual alchemy. It's a transformation. They used in material terms, the transformation was from lead to gold, but really that's really what and if you follow the 7 chakras up, that's the same concept. It's really our spiritual journey is really that transformation from the material world all the way to up to ultimately the spiritual world where we encounter God. I then looked into mediumship. There was a class that was taught here locally, and I followed that for a while and tried to learn. I wasn't that great at it, but there were the ability to channel people who had gone from the other side. And it was through that where I first learned about Edgar Cayce. I had never heard of him before, surprisingly, which is probably not too surprising given the coverage of things today. But he was here actually in the same state that I am, only on the other end, and the sleeping prophet, they called him, or the father of holistic medicine. He had given over 10,000 psychic readings on a whole number of topics. Mostly started out with health, but then got into major issues of philosophy and theology, etc. And so I started studying him more. And it was through that experience that I discovered the university that he founded, called Atlantic University, which is based in Virginia Beach, where he was in the last part of his life. And I began a master's program in transpersonal psychology last April. I'm now 3 courses in, and it's a great place to be. I enjoy the work, and not only is it studying different approaches to spirituality as well as to life and medicine as well, but it also involves your own transformations. There's things you learn, such as dream therapy and meditation, other types of practices that can not only help you ultimately help others, but you need to help yourself first. And this has been a great backdrop for me. Part of what's come along in terms of my spiritual journey has been a desire to do something different in terms of my career. As I mentioned, I had been in the political world and still am to some extent, although I do more public policy work now in the communications realm. But part of this transformation, and most recently, has been to try to find something where I can match up the spiritualities that I'm uncovering with a vocation. And that's why I decided to launch this website. I received a hypnotherapy certification a year ago, so I have that training, as well as now this master's I'm pursuing in transpersonal psychology. So that's what the purpose of my site is. I'm going to be helping others and offering services that are found on my website. And then, as part of my creative desire, which I still love communications, it's going to be posting regular videos and writing blogs. Right now, the material is primarily from papers and posts that I'm doing as part of my classes, but eventually I'll be commenting on other things as well. So I'm glad you took the time to check out my video, and please check back both on my YouTube channel and my website for additional content. Thank you.